My husband, Peter, and I have been together for years, married for 3, and we have 2 beautiful children together. I'm originally from Western Canada, born and raised, while Peter is from Germany. We lived in Canada for a long time, building our life together, but when inflation started skyrocketing and the cost of living became unbearable, we made the tough decision to move back to his home country. It made sense. Peter's family was there, he had a strong support system, and we found a beautiful house in Hannover that we could actually afford. It wasn't an easy move, especially because I was pregnant with our second child, but we both believed it would be the best decision for our growing family. The day after we landed in Germany, we went straight to visit Peter's parents. This was only the second time I had ever met them, the first being at our wedding. I'll be honest, I was a little nervous. Meeting in-laws at a wedding is one thing, but integrating into their world, living in the same country as them, and becoming part of their day-to-day lives was a whole new reality. At first, everything seemed fine. They greeted us warmly, brought us inside, and immediately started fawning over our son. Dinner was nice, and despite my exhaustion from the flight and the pregnancy, I felt hopeful. Maybe this transition would be easier than I thought. We left that evening feeling welcomed and ready to settle into our new home. Over the next few months, we visited Peter's family often. I tried to be open-minded and friendly, even though I often felt like an outsider. I knew they were close-knit, and I wanted to fit in for Peter's sake. But as time went on, I started noticing little things that made my stomach twist and my heart sink. It started with whispers. Casual, offhand comments in German that I wasn't supposed to understand. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being paranoid. But then I began catching words I knew, words about me. They would critique my hair, my makeup, my clothing choices, and even my body. My pregnant body. That was the hardest part. Pregnancy is already an emotional roller coaster, and I was already feeling vulnerable. But to hear them make snide remarks about my growing belly, my swollen ankles, and my changing shape? It crushed me. I never let them see me cry, but I cried a lot when I got home. After weeks of this, I finally broke down and told Peter. I told him how his family was treating me, how they picked apart everything I did, and how I was tired of feeling like I was constantly under a microscope. He looked genuinely upset, which gave me a little hope. He promised he would talk to them. And to his credit, he did. The next time we visited his parents, there were no more mean comments. It was like nothing had ever happened. I wanted to believe that they had changed, that they had learned to accept me, that maybe this was the start of something better. For 3 months, everything was peaceful. I gave birth to our beautiful daughter, Lilith, and for the first time in a long time, I felt happy. She was perfect in every way. Then came the name issue. We named her Lilith, not because of its meaning, but because it was a name deeply rooted in my family. Every woman in my family for generations had carried the name. My middle name is Lilith, as was my mother's, my grandmother's, and even my great-grandmother's. To me, it was a legacy, something special to pass on. But Peter's family was horrified. Apparently, in Germany, the name Lilith has a dark connotation. It means ghost or of the night, and it's associated with superstition and negativity. They reacted as though we had named her Lucifer. The judgment was immediate and brutal, but I refused to change her name. It was important to me, and they would just have to get over it. For a while, I avoided visiting them. I didn't want to hear their passive-aggressive comments about how I had cursed my daughter with a bad name. I had just given birth, I was dealing with postpartum emotions, and the last thing I needed was their negativity. Then, yesterday, we finally saw them again. It was my mother-in-law's birthday, and despite my reservations, I went along for Peter's sake. I should have trusted my instincts. From the moment we walked in, everything went wrong. Everyone immediately swarmed us, wanting to hold Lilith. I felt overwhelmed. I wasn't ready for this. I was still navigating postpartum depression, still adjusting to having 2 kids, and the thought of passing my fragile newborn around like a party favor made my anxiety spike. I politely declined. I let people look at her, but I held her close and refused when they asked to hold her. That's when the whispers started again. During dinner, I heard my sister-in-law talking to my mother-in-law in German. She was complaining about how I was being difficult, how I was acting like a princess, and how it was so unfair that she couldn't hold my baby. And then she said it. She called me a fat, ugly, hokey addict. I don't know what snapped in me at that moment, but I had had enough. I turned to both of them, and in perfect German, I let them have it. I told them that I had known all along what they had been saying about me, that I had understood every cruel word they had ever whispered behind my back. I told them that they could think whatever they wanted about me, but calling me names was the final straw. The table exploded. People were shouting over each other, blaming me, accusing me of causing a scene. It was as if I was the villain for finally standing up for myself. Peter and I left immediately. He has been supportive, but his family has not reached out since. So now I sit here, wondering, was I wrong? Was I too harsh? Should I have just let it go? Or was I justified in finally speaking up after months of cruelty? I don't know anymore. But I do know one thing, I will never let anyone treat me or my children like that again. Update 1. I never expected my life to take such a drastic turn after that dinner, but here I am, sitting in my new home, trying to process everything that has happened since that night. I suppose this is the first official update, though I have a feeling this situation is far from over. After we left my mother-in-law's birthday dinner, the car ride home was dead silent. Peter had his hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that his knuckles were white. I could tell he was fuming, but I wasn't sure if he was angry at me, at his family, or at the entire mess we had just walked into. My hands were still shaking. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and I kept replaying everything in my head. The whispers. The insults. The explosion at the table. I felt raw, exposed, and completely drained. When we got home, I expected Peter to argue with me, to say that I should have handled things differently, that I shouldn't have caused a scene. But instead, he quietly put our son to bed, checked on Lilith, and sat down on the couch without saying a word. That night, we didn't talk much. He just held me, and I let myself cry into his shoulder. The weight of everything, my postpartum depression, the stress of moving, the exhaustion of constantly trying to please his family, had become too much. The next morning, the storm began. Peter's phone was filled with messages. His mother, his sister, his cousins, everyone had something to say. Some messages were long and guilt-tripping, others were passive-aggressive, and a few were outright furious. Apparently, I had ruined the evening. I was ungrateful for all the times they had welcomed me into their home. They were just joking when they made those comments, and if I had an issue, I should have just been mature about it. The gaslighting was unreal. But the worst part? They blamed me for humiliating them. Not once did anyone acknowledge what they had done or said to me. Not once did they apologize. Instead, I was the villain in their narrative, the dramatic foreigner who had overreacted and disrespected them in their own home. For a few days, I stayed silent. I didn't respond to any messages, and I barely spoke to Peter about it. He, on the other hand, was stuck in the middle. He knew what his family had done was wrong. He had witnessed it with his own eyes. But they were his family, and no matter how awful they had been, he felt torn between defending me and maintaining some kind of peace with them. And then, the ultimatum came. His mother sent a long, emotional message telling Peter that he needed to fix this. That he needed to make me apologize for disrespecting them. That if I wanted to be part of this family, I had to learn how to be a proper German wife. I saw the message over Peter's shoulder as he read it. I will never forget the way his jaw tensed, the way his entire body stiffened as he took in every word. I expected him to try to soften it, to try to reason with me, to say something like, maybe you could just apologize to keep the peace. But instead, he stood up, grabbed his phone, and blocked his mother's number. He looked at me and simply said, "No one talks about my wife like that." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. But the drama wasn't over. In the days that followed, we started noticing strange things happening. People from Peter's family began leaving passive-aggressive comments on my social media posts. I had been keeping my profile mostly private since the move, but I had shared a few pictures of our life in Germany, our kids, and little moments from our daily routine. Suddenly, these posts were being flooded with indirect jabs, comments about how some people should respect their in-laws and how tradition matters more than feelings. Some comments were in German, probably because they assumed I wouldn't understand, but at this point, that assumption was laughable. Then, there was the incident at the grocery store. I was shopping with Lilith strapped to my chest in her baby carrier and my son sitting in the cart when I noticed a familiar face near the produce section. It was one of Peter's aunts. The moment she saw me, she scowled and turned her back, whispering something to the woman beside her. I tried to ignore it and continue shopping, but the whispers followed me through the store. It was clear they wanted me to know they were talking about me. And then, as I was grabbing a carton of milk, Peter's aunt bumped into me. Hard. It wasn't an accident. She didn't even pretend it was. She just gave me the smug look and walked away as if nothing had happened. I stood there, stunned. I had never experienced anything like this before. That night, I told Peter about it, and he was livid. He wanted to confront her, but I told him it wasn't worth it. His family was making it clear that I wasn't welcome, and at this point, I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to let them bully me out of my own life. Then came the final blow. A few days later, we received a letter. An actual, handwritten letter from Peter's mother. It was long and dramatic, detailing all the ways I had disrespected their family, how I was poisoning Peter against them, and how my presence in Germany was a mistake. At the very end of the letter, she wrote something that made my blood run cold. If you truly loved Peter, you would leave. Germany is not your home. You don't belong here. I sat there, staring at the words, my hands shaking with rage. I don't belong here. I had uprooted my entire life for this. I had left my family, my friends, my home, everything I knew, to build a future here. And yet, no matter what I did, I would always be the outsider. Peter read the letter, and without hesitation, he ripped it in half. That was it. That was the moment he decided that he was done. He made it clear that until his family could treat me with basic human respect, they would not be part of our lives. He blocked them on everything. No more visits. No more forced family gatherings. No more chances. It was both freeing and heartbreaking. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew that his family wouldn't accept this without a fight. And part of me still wondered, would they ever truly let us be? Or would they continue to find ways to make my life in Germany miserable? For now, we are focusing on our little family. On healing. On creating a home where we feel safe. But I have a feeling this battle isn't over yet. I'll update again when the next storm hits. Because knowing them? It's only a matter of time. Update 2. I never thought I'd be writing this update so soon, but here we are. I suppose I should have expected it. When people like my in-laws feel like they're losing control, they don't just walk away. They push harder, dig deeper, and lash out in ways you never see coming. After Peter made the decision to cut ties with his family, things were eerily quiet for a while. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that made my skin crawl because I knew it wasn't over. These were people who thrived on control and manipulation. They weren't going to accept that we had just walked away from them. At first, their absence felt like a relief. The weight of their constant judgment was gone. There were no more backhanded comments, no more whispers in German that they assumed I wouldn't understand, no more passive-aggressive messages flooding Peter's phone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I focused on my children, my healing, and settling into my new home. Postpartum depression still clung to me like a heavy fog, but without the added stress of Peter's family, I finally felt like I was making progress. Peter was supportive, more than ever, and our relationship felt stronger for the first time since moving to Germany. But then, the retaliation began. It started with little things. Strange encounters with people I barely knew, neighbors who suddenly seemed cold, other mothers at the park who stopped engaging in small talk. It didn't take long for me to realize that Peter's family had been spreading rumors about me. And not just the usual petty gossip. They were telling people that I was emotionally abusive. That I had forced Peter to cut them off. That I was keeping our children away from their German roots. That I was, as they so eloquently put it, a selfish, controlling foreigner who wanted to erase Peter's culture. That part made me laugh. I was the one who moved to Germany for Peter. I was the one who left behind my entire life in Canada. I was the one struggling to fit into a place that was never truly welcoming to me. But somehow, I was the villain. The worst part was that their lies started to have real consequences. Peter's boss, a man who had always been friendly toward him, suddenly became distant. We found out that Peter's mother had actually called his workplace, painting me as this manipulative, unstable wife who was isolating her son from his family. She claimed that Peter was under a lot of emotional stress and subtly hinted that it was because of me. Who does that? Who tries to ruin their own son's career just to make a point? Peter was livid. If he had any doubts before about cutting them off, they were gone now. He went to his boss, explained the situation, and thankfully, his boss didn't take the bait. But the damage was done. The seed had been planted, and people were looking at us differently. Then came the final straw. One afternoon, I was home alone with the kids when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was met with two unfamiliar faces, officials from the Jugendamt, Germany's Child Protective Services. My stomach dropped. They informed me that they had received an anonymous report claiming that our children were living in an unstable environment. That I was suffering from severe mental health issues and was unfit to care for them. That Peter was being controlled and emotionally abused. I felt sick. I knew exactly where this was coming from. And worse? They had made the report in German, knowing that, if my German hadn't been fluent, I wouldn't have been able to defend myself properly. But here's the thing. They underestimated me. I was calm. I was polite. I invited them in, let them look around, and answered every question with unwavering confidence. I showed them my medical records, which proved that, yes, I had struggled with postpartum depression, but I was actively receiving help and doing well. I showed them my children's medical checkups, proving that they were healthy and thriving. And when they asked if I had any idea who might have made the report, I told them everything. The whispers, the rumors, the passive-aggressive comments. The letter from my mother-in-law telling me I didn't belong in Germany. The fact that Peter had cut ties with them because of their ongoing emotional abuse. By the time they left, they were actually apologetic. It was clear that this was nothing more than a smear campaign, a desperate attempt from bitter people trying to regain control. The case was closed almost immediately, and I knew that Peter's family had failed in their last-ditch attempt to break us. That was the moment I knew we were truly done with them. Peter didn't just block them. He changed his number. We deleted them from social media. We even told mutual acquaintances that we didn't want to hear about them anymore. We removed every single avenue they had to reach us, and we moved on. And something amazing happened. Life got better. Without their toxicity looming over us, I started feeling like myself again. The postpartum depression that had been suffocating me started to lift. Peter was happier, more present, more engaged. We found new friends, people who actually cared about us. I started taking language courses to fully master German, not because I needed to anymore, but because I wanted to. Our children thrived. And then, the biggest surprise of all, Peter got an incredible job offer in Berlin. A fresh start. A chance to build a life away from the shadow of his family. We took it. We packed up our things, moved to Berlin, and never looked back. Now, as I sit in our new apartment, watching my son play with his toys while Lilith giggles in my lap, I realize something. I do belong here. Not because of Peter's family. Not because of their approval. Not because of their outdated, suffocating idea of what it means to be part of a family. I belong here because we built this life. We made it work. We survived every single storm they threw at us. I won't pretend that what they did didn't hurt. It did. It still does, sometimes. But I refuse to let it define me. This is our fresh start. And this time? It's on our terms. Now that the dust has settled and my life is finally in a peaceful place, I've had a lot of time to reflect. A lot of people have reached out asking if I regret anything, if I handled things the right way, or if I should have taken a different approach. And, of course, the biggest question of all, was I the asshole? To be honest, there were moments when I questioned myself. In the beginning, when the whispers first started, I wondered if I was just being too sensitive. Maybe I had misheard, maybe I was misunderstanding the cultural differences, maybe it was all in my head. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept creeping in, especially when I saw how effortlessly Peter's family seemed to get along with everyone except me. When I finally stood up for myself at that dinner, it felt good, for about 5 minutes. Then the guilt crept in. Had I overreacted? Should I have just let it slide? Should I have confronted them privately instead of letting the whole table explode into chaos? But the more I think about it, the more I realize something. I didn't start this. I was patient. I was quiet. I endured months of passive-aggressive comments, cruel whispers, and judgment before I ever said a word. I gave them chance after chance, hoping they would grow to accept me, hoping they would at least pretend to be decent people for the sake of family harmony. And what did they do? They pushed. They manipulated. They went out of their way to make me feel like I didn't belong. And then, when I finally spoke up, I was the bad guy. So, no. I don't regret standing up for myself at that dinner. I don't regret telling them I understood German. I don't regret calling them out on their behavior in front of everyone. Because in that moment, they needed to be exposed. They needed to know that I wasn't some clueless foreigner they could bully behind my back. But do I regret anything else? I think about the period after the dinner, the months of cutting them off, the way Peter's family retaliated, the CPS visit, the rumors. There were moments when I wondered if I should have handled things differently. Maybe if I had been more diplomatic, if I had tried harder to mend things, we could have avoided the full-on war that followed. But then I remember who I was dealing with. These were people who tried to manipulate my husband's workplace. Who spread lies about me. Who weaponized child protective services against me. These weren't reasonable, rational people who could be won over with kindness and patience. These were people who wanted control. And when they realized they had lost it, they tried to burn everything down on their way out. If I had backed down, if I had given in, just to keep the peace, what message would that have sent? That their behavior was acceptable? That they could walk all over me forever? That I would just take it as long as I wanted to keep my marriage intact? No. I don't regret standing my ground. But was there anything I should have done differently? If I could go back and change one thing, I think I would have been more open with Peter earlier on. I carried a lot of this stress alone for too long. I was so afraid of being the reason he had to choose between me and his family that I tried to handle everything myself. I didn't tell him about all the comments right away. I downplayed my feelings, trying to convince myself I could just tough it out. I think if I had been more vocal from the start, if I had set my own boundaries earlier, things might not have escalated the way they did. Maybe we wouldn't have even attended that dinner. Maybe we would have gone low contact long before the full cutoff. Maybe I would have protected my mental health sooner. But ultimately, I made the best decisions I could with the information and the emotional state I had at the time. I was a new mother, in a foreign country, dealing with postpartum depression and a family who wanted to break me. Given those circumstances, I think I handled it pretty damn well. So, am I the asshole? No. I was a woman trying to protect herself and her children from a toxic environment. I was a wife trying to support her husband while navigating an impossible situation. I was a mother doing everything in her power to create a safe, loving home for her family. And in the end, I won. Peter and I built a new life together, free from his family's toxicity. We moved to Berlin, where we could start fresh. My postpartum depression finally lifted. I made new friends, real friends, who supported me instead of tearing me down. And Peter? He never wavered. He stood by me through everything. He saw the truth about his family, and he made the choice to put our marriage, our children, and our happiness first. That, more than anything, tells me that I was never in the wrong. I didn't steal him from his family. They drove him away with their own actions. So, no. I'm not the asshole. I'm just someone who refused to be treated like garbage. And honestly, I'd do it all again.